I'm Amy Mobby, Education Manager at Jenkins Arboretum Gardens. We appreciate all of you joining us for our second annual Hamilton Educational Fellowship Symposium. Today, we'll explore the well-respected program and discover more about the specialized projects of our current fellows. You'll also get to hear from a former fellow about their journey and how the skills and knowledge acquired during the program benefited them in their career path. There'll be time at the end for a panel question and answer, so make sure to get your questions ready and hold them to the end. Thank you to our members joining us today for your continued support. A big welcome to all of our non-members out there, and with you in mind, let me tell you a little bit about our garden. Jenkins Arboretum Gardens is a 48-acre botanical garden located in the Philadelphia suburbs. We specialize in plants native to the region and are also home to a world-class collection of rhododendrons and azaleas. Jenkins is open every day of the year and is always free of an admission fee, thanks to the generous community support that we receive. Now for a few housekeeping items. So we are using the Zoom webinar format, so we can't see or hear you at home. So feel free to eat your snacks and let your dogs bark. We will not know. We are recording today's presentation and we'll be able to share that with anyone who registered. It'll just take a few days to process and I'll email that out to everybody. We would like to ask that anyone who does want to ask a question at the end, uses the Q&A function of Zoom webinar. So if you activate your little Zoom toolbar, usually at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A section, and that's where you guys can type in the questions that we'll ask the panel at the end. You can use if you have general comments or tech issues, you can use the chat to chat with me. So now to introduce our first presenter for the Hamilton Educational Fellowship Symposium. Steve Wright is our Jenkins Director of Horticulture and Curator. So Steve, thanks for being with us, and we'll get you to share your screen.
All right, thank you, Amy. Welcome everybody, and thanks for tuning in. So I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of a history and some background about the fellowship, and then I will turn it over to our current fellows to tell you a little bit more. The fellowship is called the Hamilton Fellowship because it was supported by Mrs. Hamilton since its inception. For the first 10 years of the program, it was supported on a year-to-year basis, and the Arboretum would request support from Mrs. Hamilton each year for the first 10 years. And then at the 10-year anniversary, she decided to endow the program in perpetuity. So she has since passed on, but we are forever grateful to Mrs. Hamilton. The fellowship is in its 22nd year. It started in the year 2000. The Arboretum has grown pretty significantly over those 22 years, but at that time, there was not much of a staff. In fact, there was only a director and one gardener, and that gardener actually started in 1999. So times were pretty lean, and the fellowship really was a way to get some more boots on the ground, to get some more help in the garden. So in this picture, you see the first fellow here, Fran, with our head horticulturist at the time, Maggie. The fellowship program has evolved quite a bit over the years, going from what was then primarily a gardener position to what is now a pretty intense, kind of fully immersive horticultural and educational opportunity. And we've done that in many ways, but primarily it was with the addition of two main academic components. The first is what we call lunchtime talks. These are programs that we ask our fellows to develop and present to our staff and volunteers. Because they are in-house presentations, they tend to be a little on the informal side, and we're very open about the topics that fellows choose, as long as they're somehow related to horticulture or biology or botany or so on. The main goal of these lunchtime talks is really just to allow the fellows to get more public speaking experience. But a secondary goal is to encourage a more in-depth learning about a topic that the fellows find interesting, because research has shown that the retention rate of information reaches about 90% when you teach it to others. The second and much more substantial academic component of the fellowship is the fellow project. So every fellow is required to complete a major project that fits with the needs and the goals of the Arboretum, but also each fellow's individual interests. And these are usually fairly large projects that take up to 2 years to complete. And so far, nearly all of them have involved some sort of major garden improvement. So what you see in the picture here is actually our first fellow project. It was the Browning Hillside. At one time, there was just mowed grass that went all the way up to the fence that you can kind of see up there in the middle. And the fellow project was to start restoring that hillside, that bank, to get rid of the grass and start replanting with ecologically valuable native plants. And that fellow was Madison Purcell. And you see her here standing in the middle of a patch of mountain mint that she planted, and it quickly became her favorite plant. Another project that was done was a pond edge redesign and a bog redesign. So you see the bog being replanted in this slide, and there was even a floating structure that fellow did as part of their project. Overall, though, the goal, as I see it, oops, I apologize, for the fellowship is to provide a diverse experience. And it's one that allows emerging horticulturists an opportunity to develop their skills and discover their passions. And while they're here, the fellows gain a lot of experience in a lot of different ways. One of those ways is through volunteer management. So all fellows will work with our regular Thursday morning volunteers. We have a lot of corporate groups that will come in and work with us, and they're always asked to jump in and help with managing those groups. Fellows learn a little bit of integrated pest management. I always encourage all the fellows that come through the program to get their pesticide applicator license so that they have a deep understanding of integrated pest management. You see here, this is something that we did to capture the spotted lanternflies a few years ago. They'll learn a little bit about silviculture, which is really just manipulating the site conditions in order to achieve the goals that you have for that space. And so we definitely talk a lot about light and manipulating light and planting and removing trees and so on. Even though it's informal, we do talk a bit about dendrology, about tree identifications. My personal favorite activity out in the field is what's this plant? So it's usually like a 1 foot tall seedling tree that I'll pull up and pass it around and see if anybody can figure out what it is. So we talk about buds and leaf arrangement and so on and so forth. Fellows will gain a little bit of experience in natural lands management and ecological restoration. Seen here was shortly after we removed a bunch of invasive trees in our conservation woodlands. We're in the process of replanting that space. So we have been replanting some of these spaces for the last 10 plus years. We do have beehives at the Arboretum. And so the fellows usually are interested in gaining a little bit of experience in beekeeping. And we even do the harvesting in-house, so that's always a highlight. We do a lot of propagation in-house. We do have a plant shop upstairs. We sell a lot of our own plants. We also propagate a lot of plants for our collections. So you see here are some fellows and interns helping with both seed propagation and cutting propagation. Often there's a need to do soil tests. So fellows will learn how to gather proper soil samples, process those samples, send them out to get tested, and then we learn how to read those results and make decisions based on those results. It's less now than it used to be, but fellows do learn a little bit about plant records. It kind of depends on what their projects are. I know that Liesl is probably going to tell you a little bit about mapping the collections down along our floodplain and working with the database and entering information into our database. There's often some basic woodworking or carpentry that fellows do while they're here. We do have a bobcat, and we always train the fellows on how to use the bobcat and other pieces of equipment as well, including kind of recently, we've started asking the fellows to use the chainsaw a little bit. So we teach them sort of the basics of chainsaw use and safety. We ask the fellows to join the rest of the staff in doing tours. One of those is the Wednesday walkabouts, sort of on a rotating basis. All the staff will participate in these tours and various other programs throughout the year that they might be interested in leading. The fellows will often lead workshops, not just for the public. This is actually an in-house workshop. One of our fellows was very interested in mushrooms, and so he did a mushroom log workshop with the rest of the staff. We go on quite a few field trips throughout the year. This is a trip that fellows took, I believe, last year. This was to the Pine Barrens. We took a trip to French Creek to botanize, Hershey Gardens. I think a big selling point for the fellowship is the educational stipend. So this is an amount of money that's given to each fellow to use in any way that they feel benefits them personally or professionally. Often it's used to purchase reference materials, go to conferences, workshops, seminars, and so on. Often the fellows will use the educational stipend to go on botanizing trips, usually overnight trips. And of course, they're here for 2 years, completely immersed in this plant collection, working in the garden every single day, getting their hands dirty, sort of learning by osmosis, just being out there and learning Latin names and site conditions and all the different cultivars and so on and so forth. So, they're sort of learning by doing on a daily basis. So with that, I would like to introduce you to Liesl Barkman. Liesl is our first year fellow, and we're very happy to have her on our team. She came to us highly recommended with a master's degree in environmental science and a strong interest in environmental problem solving, sustainability, and advocacy. So I will now turn it over to Liesl to tell you more about herself and what she's been working on at Jenkins so far.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to pull up my screen here. Okay. Here we go. So, hi, I'm Liesl. I'm the first year Hamilton Fellow here. And I started at Jenkins in late March. And like Steve mentioned, I had a really strong interest in native plants, restoration projects, and stormwater. And that kind of helped develop my current project. A little bit about me. I grew up in a family where my dad was an arborist. That kind of drove my interest for plants and trees throughout my life. In high school, I joined Envirothon, and that was just another avenue where I could learn plants and more about the environment. And so that led me to go to college. I originally went for conservation biology and then switched into environmental studies. And then after that, I pursued a Master of Professional Studies in Environmental Science. During college, I got to have a few internships that helped develop my interest in plants. So I did an internship that was working with wetland restoration. We planted over 88,000 plants in one summer, and that really sparked my interest for horticulture and restoration. So my fellow project here has kind of developed into a multi-step process. So I'm going to walk through each step of it. The first part was putting out rain gauges. So those are just something I track every time it rains. In the morning, I go out and record the amount that we got. So that's pretty simple. The next part was to put out these stormwater measurement pipes. So here at Jenkins, we're having some stormwater erosion issues, and to help basically monitor what's happening in the floodplain, we decided to put out these stormwater pipes, and basically I'm tracking them throughout the year. Before we could put them out, we decided to weed whack the area into the floodplain so that there was a clear path to work in. We had multiple volunteer groups come out and help us clear invasives. And then we also were managing things like yellow jacket nests and so on. So to put out the pipes, basically they were PVC pipes. You can see here in this picture that they're about 5 feet long. We drilled holes through them and then put these really long stakes into the ground. And they were just, we picked out places that seemed like they were eroding pretty severely. And you can kind of see where I'm standing over here that the stream bank is just crumbling in that whole way. Here is a good example of the final placement of one of the stormwater gauges. So you can see where the bank is eroding, and I've actually seen on this specific gauge that there's already been almost 4 inches of erosion, I believe. So we're definitely getting some good data with this. Here is a few more photos that can kind of illustrate what I'm doing. So I've been right here putting marks and measuring. And you can see here is one storm event, and then there's the next down on this photo. And basically we're just monitoring them twice a month and then after any rainstorm. So in the future, once the leaves have all dropped and closer to when the vegetation has died back, we're going to map the floodplain. So basically we're trying to get 10-foot markers along the floodplain and then map all of the woody plants. And we're going to do that using a total station, which is this device here. And I'm sure I'll get lots of help from Steve and Tara throughout that process. And then once we have mapped all of that, I'm going to upload it into BGBase. Here's a picture of the floodplain. And then from there, I can create new accession labels. So that's what this is in this photo. Right now, the quadrants aren't filled in on the accession labels in the floodplain. So I'll be able to update those labels and put them back out with a new label in the floodplain. And so now I would like to introduce our second-year Hamilton Fellow, Nicki Achor. She came to us at Jenkins after graduating from Purdue University with a degree in public horticulture and minors in urban forestry and botany. During her time, she grew passionate about educating people with native plants and had the opportunity to expand on her passion at Jenkins through her fellow project. So that was involving renovating the upper wildflower bed, and the installation of her project was completed this fall. So she'll be sharing her experience with that today.
All right, thank you, Liesl. I'll just get situated here. All right. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Nicki, and like Liesl introduced, I am the second-year fellow here at Jenkins. Basically, what that means is I've just been here a little longer. I arrived last year in June, so it's coming up on a year and 6 months. I've been very busy during that time, and I'm just going to share a bit about my experience. We get a little timer set up. We're all good. All right. So just to share a little bit about me, I'm actually from Chesterton, Indiana. And it's actually a very unique place. And I like to share that. So I actually grew up, here's a red dot, and I grew up right along the lake. And it's a very unique ecosystem. I, throughout my childhood, spent my times going to the beach and going on hikes. And I don't know if I fully realized it at the time, but it was really formative in me choosing my career path and figuring out what I wanted to do. I ended up creating a horticulture club with my friend in high school. And since then, that just really springboarded me into this place of wanting to be outside every day and work with plants. So that actually led me to study horticulture at Purdue University. I ended up specializing in public horticulture, again, just being immersed in this public gardening world and really enjoying it. I also picked up some minors in urban forestry and botany. While I was there, I tried to dip my toes into as many things as I could. I spent a year working in an apple grafting lab, and also got to spend a lot of time working with the Purdue Arboretum. I was a teaching assistant for our woody plants class for several years, and really found my place with working with native plants and teaching people about them and engaging people with them. I ended up working very closely with the Purdue Arboretum to develop our Let's Grow Native program. And again, that was just a huge campaign in the spring to engage students on campus with native plants. And I really knew that coming out of school, I knew I wanted to work with native plants. And I also knew that I really wanted to experience a full year in a garden, if possible. I had spent a couple summers interning at gardens. I had an idea of what summer management was, but I really knew that I wanted to spend like a full 4 seasons at a garden and just get to see different aspects of that management through the year. And that really led me to Jenkins. Let's see, there's the slide. It really led me to Jenkins. I had those goals leaving school, and when I was applying for the fellowship, I really just felt like it was a great fit. In my interview process, actually, the project of the upper wildflower bed was introduced to me as a renovation, working with all native plants, and that just really felt right to me. I knew that I wanted to get like hands-on experience working with them, and I knew that with this project, that's something I'd be able to do. In addition, with the fellowship being 2 years, I knew I'd be getting that year-round education, learning about what managing a garden is like through the whole season. So I was really excited to come join the team here, and it just felt like a really natural fit for what I wanted to explore coming out of school. So then I'm going to shift gears a little bit and actually start to talk about my project. There's a lot to cover. It's been a very busy year. But yeah, just to give you a bit of an overview, let's see. Here's another shot of the upper wildflower bed. It's situated in a very central area of the garden. It's overlooking our pond, which in more of the summer and fall is a really big attraction for our visitors. And the upper wildflower bed, as it stood, it hadn't been renovated since 2004. That was the last time it had been planted. And it had a lot of really great plants in it, but they weren't necessarily best for this space. Let's see. Here's an example of some of those plants. Again, very beautiful, very great plants, but just not exactly ideal for the situation in the upper wildflower bed. So when I arrived, I think it might have been like my first or second day, Steve sat me down and gave me like the full rundown. The upper wildflower bed had been identified by him and by Karen, our head horticulturist, as an area that really needed a facelift. And so since my project had been addressed to me in my interview process, I knew day one what I would be working on. So I kind of got a bit of a head start, which was great. And so in that process, we realized, or I came to learn, that really the plants in the upper wildflower bed were good plants, but they just weren't in the best location. And that was for a couple reasons. So firstly, there was a mixture of smaller woody plants and aggressive perennials those aggressive perennials were also very tall, which kind of ties into my second bullet point there. In general, the sightline down to the pond was blocked, which was really a shame. It's a beautiful view that wasn't accessible to our visitors. My cat is very excited about this, apparently. But yeah, the plants that were in the bed too, they're very aggressive perennial species, and over time, they had just gotten very intermingled with each other. They were out competing a lot of those woody plants. Here is a picture that I have shown in a couple of presentations. I just think it illustrates it very well. But here, if you can see my cursor, is a little tuft of green. And after clearing away all of those perennials from the base of this plant, we came to realize it was actually a kalmia that had been growing like pretty much like at a 45-degree angle to the ground, just because it had been outcompeted by those perennials for so long. So that, combined with the large size of the bed, it was very difficult for horticulturists here to get to the bed, give it the time and attention it really needed. It was becoming difficult to interpret because you can't really tell like what plant was supposed to be where. So yeah, overall, just really needed a revamp. So that's where this project came in. And then there were some goals that were outlined for me going into this. The big one was to improve overall aesthetics. Again, just giving it that facelift it needs. It was a very central area of the garden, so really just wanting to give it some love. And then also wanting to generate summer and fall interest. Jenkins is a very spring garden with our azalea collection, and we just wanted to extend that into the summer and fall, offer more for our visitors to see. In addition to that, allowing the view down to the pond was very important. So wanting to keep those plants at about 4 feet max to allow that view. Taking this as an opportunity to add new species and cultivars to our collection. Also improving ecological value of the space, which was something I was very passionate about. And then also reducing the maintenance burden on horticulture staff. And so that takes us into fall clearing. This was like the first like boots on the ground kind of activity that we worked on with my project. And I was very excited. A question that I get a lot is what happened to all the plants that were in the bed. And we really wanted to be mindful of using all of the plants that we could. Like I said, these were all good plants. They just weren't necessarily in the best spot. So that took us down a lot of different avenues. We transplanted these plants to other areas in the garden, to areas in our floodplain. We potted plants up for sale and to hold for later use in our collection. We gave a lot of plants to other organizations, which was really awesome. We were able to sell a lot of dug plants and generate some income for our shop. And then in some cases, we did just remove some plants that unfortunately weren't able to be used in other places. So here, just some fun pictures from that fall clearing. Here was a particular cultivar of Kalmia called Willowcrest, and it's very unique. It has like a very thin leaf. So again, that being a really unique specimen, we wanted to save it. So that led to a large transplanting project and moving these Kalmias into our parking lot. Here are just some pictures from that day. I did not have experience transplanting shrubs this large. They're so heavy and they're just so difficult to maneuver around. But it was a great experience for me. Here is some more brush hauling. There was a lot of brush hauling. And then here are just some shots of what the bed looked like a year ago. This was as we were pecking away at plants and digging them out, finding new homes for them, adding chopped leaves to make it look a little more presentable in the meantime. And this was pretty much where the bed was left in the fall. We had some pretty big holes from where we'd been popping things out, but you could start to see where things would be going. This picture I remember I was really excited about at the time because you could finally see down. You couldn't really, the plants that were in the bed were about 6 feet tall. So I really couldn't picture the view down to the pond and picture what the bed would look like once it was redone. But once we had cleared enough area, I kind of got that first glimpse, and that was just a really great thing to see. And that led me into the winter. Another question that I get a lot is what do we do in the winter? And for me last year, it was this plant list. It was this. This is just a snapshot of what I had worked on. But the first phase for me designing was just figuring out what plants were out there. So I found anything that could possibly work in this bed, and I threw it on this list, and kept track of things like the height and how wide it gets, what color is it, when does it bloom, trying to keep track of why I liked it in the first place. And this list took me a very long time to develop. The horticulture staff helped me with a lot of it too. And I ended up with about, I think, 150 plants on this list alone. And the step after that was to start to weave it into an actual design. And the way that I did that was by printing out pictures of my favorites. So I would find pictures of each of the blooms or each of the plants, and then make little square cutouts. And on that, it had the height of the plant, its final height, and then also other characteristics like the time that it bloomed. And over time, I organized that and refined it. And so I was able to figure out when things would be blooming, what would be blooming at the same time, what combinations I liked, what combinations might not work. And slowly over time, I got to refine that more and more, and eventually translated it to a computer. I actually did all of my designs on Excel, which I think surprises people, but it actually has a very great capability you can adjust the grid lines to squares, and then everything that you do is to scale. It's a trick I learned from Steve, and it worked really great. And what was also nice was that I had the capability to move things around, didn't have to worry about erasing. It was all very clean. But yeah, so after I had kind of put together what sort of combinations I was looking at, I had to figure out how to picture that all as one cohesive design, which was a learning process. It really was. Steve and I had talked a lot about finding a middle between a very, very formal bed that looked like someone planted it, and then the complete opposite, which was more of like a naturalistic meadow. We wanted to try to find a good middle where it looked like there was intention behind the design, but it also looked like it could have just grown there on its own. And again, finding that middle really took a lot of practice. So here was the first iteration of one of my designs, and it was very busy. I just kind of threw everything in there all at once, and it showed. And so then, talked with Steve, and then we came back. I worked on it some more, and I came up with a second iteration. And that one kind of took a shift towards being a little too clumped together. The patches were a little too defined, and it was looking more formal than we were hoping. And then finally, third time's a charm, I was able to find a good mix and that good balance between formal and naturalistic. So here there are definitely distinct groupings of plants, but they kind of weave together in a natural way. And so I was really happy with how that turned out and expanded it. So the upper wildflower bed is very large. And so for me, it made a lot of sense to kind of break things down into different sections. So here are some of those sections. There was the one we were just looking at, and then I kind of chipped away at the other parts of the bed and came up with a cohesive design. I can't say that the planting looks exactly like how it is on paper, but it was a really great visual and kind of the first glimpse into what the new bed would look like, which was really exciting. This is probably like visually the most boring slide in my presentation, but it's a very special one to me. Over the winter, I also had the opportunity to apply for a grant from the Chester County Beekeepers Association successfully, which was great. I worked very hard in preparing this grant. It ended up being 15 pages long. Again, working very closely with Steve and Stephanie on coordinating that. And in the process, I was trying to find plants that were best suited for bees, actually to apply for this grant. And in the process, I just really fell down a very deep rabbit hole, and I fell in love with pollinators. I fell in love with bees. I just think they're so charismatic. They tell such great stories about the relationships between insects and plants. So although I'm so happy to be able to have successfully gotten this grant, it allowed me to afford some more fancy plants that I wanted. And it also was just a really great springboard for me learning about pollinators, which is something I've grown to be so passionate about. That takes us through the winter. And this spring, again, kind of shifted gears, and we were back out getting boots on the ground. We left a lot of holes in the fall after transplanting, and those holes needed to be filled. So there were countless loads of golf carts that we filled with a mixture of topsoil and then NX6, which is kind of like a barky potting soil. So we just took cartloads of those out into the bed, filled the holes, raked them, tamped them in. We also had a final big dig with our volunteers. I actually wasn't here for this day. Karen gave me these photos. But again, I was really wanting to make sure that we could give the plants that weren't going to make it into the final design the most mileage that we could. So this was a fun day. Volunteers just got to go out with plastic bags, dig whatever they wanted, however much they wanted, to take back to their yards, giving those plants a second life, which I was really happy with. And the volunteers were too. They got a lot of plants. And that took us to kind of the end of the spring. And this is what the bed looked like. This was kind of what was left after all of the taking things out and moving things around, filling holes. We were left with this. And the next step was to weed whack it all down. And that's what it looked like after that. The goal was to clear this area, take it back to bare ground, so that we could have a clear planting area for the fall. Over the summer, that meant I did a lot of spraying. I did a mixture of different chemicals just to make sure that we were getting good control over the area before replanting it. Again, I was guided by Steve and Karen on that, who both hold pesticide applicator licenses, just making sure that we got safe, good coverage, and that the plants going in wouldn't be at risk of competing with some of the aggressive plants that were in the bed, some aggressive weeds, giving them just the best shot that we could. We had to do a lot more hole filling too. There were a lot of uneven areas. There's some grading that we needed to do. So again, many more golf cart loads of soil, many. We also got a new tiller. I was very excited about this. This was a big moment. And so through this process of dumping soil and raking it out and tilling it in and raking it again, we finally got the bed to look like this. At this point, I was looking at the bed and I was ready to stop. I was like, we don't need to plant it. This is great. Let's just leave it here. It was so much work to get the bed to this point, and it was just such a dramatic change from what it had been. Yeah, I think the final number was about 7 yards of that topsoil mix that were added in. It was a huge effort on the part of our horticulture staff to get this area prepped. Totally worth it though. As much as I wanted to just be done here, I'm totally kidding. We started planting. So our planting plan for this, or my planting plan for this, was to split the bed up over the course of 3 weeks with our volunteers on Thursdays. And so that meant we got into a sort of rhythm of, every week, Steve and I would go and haul plants. We would place the plants before Thursday, and then Thursday we'd plant. And we chugged along like that for 3 weeks. So this was that first area. Again, it was a huge learning curve for me to place these plants out, but definitely with more practice, I got a lot better at it. Here's some shots of what it looked like. We started planting with volunteers. I was really glad that we got the chance to do this work with our weekly volunteers, who I'd come to know really well over the past 1.5 years. So it was just very special to share that with them. And here's a picture after our first day of planting. That's actually my dad right there. I'm going to point him out. He actually came all the way from Indiana to help us plant, which again, very special. It was a really fun time. And then here's just some more areas of the bed. There's a very complex, well, not very complex. There's a flagging system that we found to be very helpful to keep everyone organized. Again, placing more plants. It was a lot. The final number is actually 1,153 plants, which is, again, a lot, but it was totally worth it. Here are some final shots of the bed. Here's like the middle stretch of that area, the area around our eastern wahoo. Again, this area is really big, so it's hard to capture all in one glimpse. Here's another shot where you can kind of see the bed trail back a bit, and then a full length. I wish it photographed better. Honestly, it looks so much better in person. But I've been having so much fun since then, just driving past it every day and getting to see it every day and find it in unexpected places. This is actually one of my favorite views of the bed, and it's from the complete other side of the pond. And it just like tucks in so beautifully right there, and just like an unexpected surprise, and getting to see new things and learn new things about this bed, which is just really great. Here's some shenanigans. Along the way, I think it looks like a very linear, very smooth process when you see the photos back to back, but really there were a lot of hurdles that we were trying to manage in this process. And, you know, for example, we found a bumblebee nest in the bed right where we were going to be planting, and we still had work to be done in there. This is a picture of Liesl. She put on a bee jacket and just went in there, finished the weeding. One of these bumblebees stung me on the cheek. It was, you know, it wasn't exactly smooth, but we got everything done. Here's another great shot of that soil hauling that I mentioned. And it was just one of those things, learning to juggle things that are out of your control. Both of our main paths of access to the bed were actually closed for some trail maintenance, some trail repairs. So we weren't able to drive on them. So we had to get creative with getting things where we needed them. Had some oopsies along the way, but again, it was just a really great exercise in learning to adapt and learning to keep things moving in this process, move under a time crunch, and get creative with solutions. So again, just a great learning experience for me. And it was totally worth it. Here are some of the pollinator friends that I made along the way. It was really great to actually see pollinators using these plants all the way from the nursery to the garden. It was just very rewarding to see them find it and use it and enjoy it. And I've already noticed a really great diversity of pollinators visiting this bed, which is awesome. Some other components of this project, other than the planting itself, I was actually able to collaborate with a lot of different staff members to just bring the bed to our visitors' attention and to engage in different ways. This is a sign that we had in our plant shop. I worked with Helen on maintaining extra plant stock that came out of the upper wildflower bed, selling that to our visitors, engaging them with this sign that I helped develop with Stephanie. I also got to work on some really awesome educational materials. Education is definitely one of my passions. And so over the winter, I got to work on a pollinator guide that was made available to our visitors as they came through for Pollinator Week, just getting to expose them to a different world of related to plants that they might not have known before. I also got to work with Amy on BeGo, which is fantastic. It's a hybrid between like a scavenger hunt and bingo, all pollinator themed. Had so much fun pulling that together. And yeah, this was one slide. I don't have a ton of time to delve into this, but I think we can cover ways that I can talk about ways that I use my stipend in the panel. I think that'd be great. Here are just some photos that I wanted to include. And again, these are just different ways I've been able to use my funds and also like be active in this area that has like a rich history of public gardening. So again, I can share that more in the panel, but just wanted to include some brief shots. But yeah, that takes us through my project. Like I said, very busy year, but very rewarding and a really great experience all around. I've had so much fun. And yeah, with that, I am going to turn it over to Heather. So I have an intro for her, but let me just get situated here really quick. Okay. So Heather Titanich is currently the community forester at the Delaware Center for Horticulture, where she works with partners in the city and county to sustain a safe and equitable tree canopy cover. Her days are spent coordinating tree plantings and educating the public on the importance of urban trees. She also has a background in public horticulture, where she worked to connect people with plants and promote the diversity of native species. Heather holds a BS in Forest Resource and Environmental Conservation from Virginia Tech, is an ISA certified arborist, and has earned her tree risk assessment qualification.
Thank you, Nikki. And with that, I will share my screen. All right, so thank you, Nikki, again for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us on this nice, rainy, kind of foggy, muggy November day. So as Nikki mentioned, I'm Heather Titanich, the community forester at the Delaware Center for Horticulture. But before that, I was a Hamilton Educational Fellow from 2019 through 2021. So a little bit more about my background. I studied at Virginia Tech. I studied forest resources and environmental conservation, which is very much based in traditional forestry in the College of Natural Resources. And then I also had a minor in urban forestry, so kind of the intersection of people and plants. So a lot of our labs were very outdoor based, really immersing you in the woods of, in and around Blacksburg, Virginia. So a lot of our labs looked just like these photos here, where you have a group of students that heads out in a 12-passenger van into national forests, parks nearby or around campus. You're all in your hard hats. Mine was bright orange. And you're, learning about tree identification, soils, wetland delineation, silviculture, forestry, just really running the gambit of learning about different, natural resource management and different career paths that could lead you to. So that hands-on immersive experience really transitioned well as I landed at Jenkins right after graduating college. And this was the perfect landing pad for that, because the fellowship is really designed to be this temporary entry-level position that poises you to be, really well-versed in horticulture. The main focuses are on naturalistic gardening throughout the woodland garden at Jenkins, and then also doing some plant propagation, greenhouse management, working in the plant shop, growing plants on to be planted in the garden, transplanting, a whole host of skills that you really build at Jenkins. So the 2-year fellowship, well, it's, I guess 1 to 2 years, but I'd really recommend staying for 2 years and just having that opportunity to build on the skills in the first year and apply them in the second year, really just gain confidence with that. And, there's a lot to say about repetition of skills. And this is really kind of a unique opportunity for the area. So there's, a lot of gardens in the Philadelphia area, a lot of organizations doing community greening. And there's other entry-level positions available. There's a lot of summer internships, year-long internships, or even seasonal positions out there that would also be good ways to get your foot in the door, learn horticultural skills. But having the opportunity for this 2-year entry-level position is pretty unique because, you're still kind of getting your footing, but you have 2 growing seasons under your belt. You've really gotten to know the garden over 2 years, seeing it, spring, summer, fall, winter, doing snow removal, planting, and just really getting that experience of 2 years and the repetition and building those skills in your second year, and kind of having more of a leadership role in that, becoming a second-year fellow, working with the first-year fellow and summer interns, and the rest of the Hort staff. So as we say, this is very much a hands-on experience. And Jenkins is a really small staff. There's not too many full-time staff, and that really gives you the opportunity to work with a lot of people and get to know people pretty closely. So as a fellow, you're on the horticulture staff, but you're also working really closely with the director of horticulture and curator of plant collections. You're also working with the education department, doing lectures and talks and tours. And you even get, to work closely with the executive director and the board members, which you don't always see at larger organizations. You may not have as much face time day to day, week to week with directors or, even the board of directors. So kind of a unique program in that you're small staff, you're doing a lot, but you're also meeting a lot of people who have a lot of great connections and are just really there to see you succeed and really help support you in your career. So over these 2 years, and as you saw in Nicki's presentation, there is a lot of planting to be done. Spring and fall are really busy, lots of transplanting, planting throughout different areas of the garden. In the woodland areas, more of the sunny areas like the Browning hillside is kind of getting an experience with more of the sun tolerant meadow plants, working with wetland plants in the bog, putting on waders, going and, weeding in the water lilies, just kind of a whole experience of planting in different types of ecosystems and habitats. And I kind of had an interesting experience at Jenkins in that starting in 2019, it was kind of business as usual. The fellowship was chugging along, and then COVID hit halfway through. And so kind of regrouping and closing our gates to the public for a little bit, just so that everybody stayed safe. But during this time, we were a small staff working outside, making sure we were all distanced and staying safe. But we were also able to accomplish a lot of really big projects that we may not have been able to do as easily if we were still having to be clean and tidy for the public coming through every day. So Jenkins is open 365 days a year. Very, what I like to say, honest horticulture. You really see, if you're a visitor at Jenkins, you really kind of see the nitty gritty of it, especially if you go, when the hort staff is out mowing or planting or transplanting. But during the pandemic was kind of a really unique opportunity. And so one of the larger projects we did was transplanting the collection of trilliums. So if you've been to Jenkins during the springtime, the azaleas are in full bloom. And there's also quite a lot of species of trillium that have grown, done really well, formed large clumps. They've hybridized with other trilliums. And so we took this opportunity to kind of do a big project that, we took out a lot of the clumps of trillium, divided them, replanted them, and kind of grew on their populations in other areas of the garden. So, if the public were there and coming to see trilliums, they may not have been so happy to see some holes in the garden where their favorite trilliums were, or, some of them that had delayed bloom times because we were transplanting them. So kind of a unique opportunity and getting to do hands-on dirty horticulture. And that's just what it is. You see the photo on the far right there I believe we had a warm winter and we were transplanting a lot of trees that day. It was a little bit rainy. So investing in rain pants was definitely one of the best things that I did at Jenkins, so that you're weatherproof, you're waterproof, you're ready for horticulture. So one of the only constants at Jenkins is that it's constantly evolving, constantly changing. Steve's in the horticulture office, just, thinking of ways to expand the garden and really do these big changes and renovations. And as Steve's designs got more ambitious, so did the size of the plants. So during planting season, you're really planting pretty much everything from plugs, small herbaceous plugs, all the way to bald and burlap trees, or these large azaleas that you see there. But with this, we also got some more training on large equipment. So, not only to make the job easier, but just so that the fellows and everyone on the hort staff was comfortable using this equipment confidently and, able to kind of build your skill set in equipment maintenance. So kind of building out your horticultural resume. So we're trained in using, excavators, which is pictured there. Steve mentioned the Bobcat earlier, using skid steers and all those tools for snow removal, planting, using it for mulching, and then also using the tractor. So you've heard 2 other fellow projects, and my independent fellow project for the time that I was there was a little bit different in that it wasn't a garden design or a monitoring or a garden renovation project, but my fellow project really did allow me to become very familiar with pretty much every inch of the garden, every plant that was growing there. So I was curating the herbaceous collection. And so this was something that had been done pretty consistently for all the woody plants at Jenkins. So all of the azaleas, rhododendron, trees, shrubs, they had all been accessioned and they have tags on them and they were mapped, but that hadn't been done for the herbaceous collection yet. So during this process, it was very informative, and I was working very closely with the director of horticulture and the curatorial assistant to delineate garden beds, to walk through the garden multiple times a year, make sure we're really getting all of the different plants throughout the year, from spring ephemerals to the late summer bloomers, making sure that we had a good inventory throughout the year of what was growing where. So we collected information like the species, the amount of plants that were there, and if they were worthy of a label. So another aspect of this project, and what was a huge winter portion for it, because as Nicki mentioned, you get asked a lot, what do you do at a garden in the winter? So making sure that all of the herbaceous signs that we had were consistent and up to date. If you plant nerds out there may be familiar with the ever-changing world of botanical names, botanists really like to keep themselves busy and reclassify, new species, new genera, kind of just keep you on your toes. So I was, out there collecting all the information of what plants were where, and then I was double checking their names, making sure that they were up to date, that they were spelled correctly, that we were using consistent common names on all of our signs, and that the signs were dispersed evenly throughout the garden. And then also mapping this in BGBase, which Liesl touched on a little bit. It's a botanical mapping system for botanic gardens. So that's when I worked more with the curatorial assistant. And it's kind of similar to geographic information systems and using aerial imagery to map, which is, an emerging field within greening and horticulture and forestry. So I've mentioned that Jenkins is a pretty small staff, but this is a good thing a lot of the times. You really kind of become the Swiss Army knife of horticulturists. So during the growing season, yes, you're weeding, you're planting, maybe you're watering, you're mulching. You also have opportunities for beekeeping. So collecting honey, checking on the hives throughout the year. In the springtime, if you're lucky, or maybe not, depending on how you feel about bees, we had a few swarms when I was there. So the bees were kind of outgrowing their home, and so they swarmed into the crabapple trees, and the other fellow and I are pictured here collecting that swarm of bees in a cardboard box. So just a fun fact, a swarm of bees is very docile because the queen is at the center and all of the worker bees are surrounding her, and they're just attracted to her pheromone, which keeps them very calm, very nice, very docile. I would still recommend wearing protective gear if you're planning on capturing a swarm of bees, but they only weigh about 2 pounds, so you can collect them in a cardboard box and then physically throw them into their new hive to relocate them. So even if I never work with bees again in my life, I have a fun fact about myself that I've caught a swarm of bees. So that was definitely an interesting experience that was kind of horticulture adjacent, but just one of those great experiences that you get at Jenkins being on such a small staff. During the summer, you're also doing mowing and becoming comfortable with, weed whackers, mowers, tractors, and all their maintenance and how to use them to, make your jobs easier. During the winter, you're also, doing some woodworking, as Steve mentioned, working in the nursery. Here we are building a little hoop house for some shrubs to keep critters out of the nursery and keep the plants healthy to be sold in the garden shop. So horticulture is definitely the main aspect of the fellowship at Jenkins, but kind of woven in that and throughout is really the skill of volunteer management and community engagement. They really go hand in hand in my mind. So you're, working with the weekly volunteers, but you're also leading them. And especially as you get to know them better, a lot of people return week after week. So you get to form that community and really become comfortable leading groups of people doing planting demonstrations and quality assurance and making sure that everything is being done consistently and that, you're hitting all the weeds or you're, getting mulch everywhere. So leading weekly garden volunteers, and then part of that volunteer program are the lunchtime talks, which are a great way to work on public speaking, creating lectures on pretty much whatever you want. So it's another great opportunity. Also, if you're in horticulture and you just kind of want to know what else is out there, or you have one specific area of interest, you can focus on that as a lunchtime talk. So some of the ones I remember doing were talking about the science behind fall color and unsuspected pollinators. So talking about how bats are also pollinators and some birds out there. So you can kind of choose whatever topics you want and kind of just run with them. And so you present these to the volunteers during a potluck lunch. Every other month, you kind of alternate which fellow presents. So it's a pretty, low stress environment to work on your presentation skills, work on public speaking. They say that public speaking is people's #1 fear, more so than death. So it's just a skill that's always good to be working on and honing and practicing. And on that vein, you can take you can take a lunchtime talk, evolve it and create it to become a public lecture to give to the public, virtual or in person. And then also tours. So Jenkins has Wednesday walkabouts, which are free tours. So just another way to practice leading people through the garden and kind of using it as an outdoor classroom to talk about really whatever you want, whatever interests you. You can talk about, the fall color, late blooming herbaceous plants, pollinators, just kind of leading groups of people through, engaging with the community and being comfortable being in that position of just, talking about plants and being an advocate for Jenkins. So the fellow stipend was something that really, reinforced the idea of professional development and continuing education. And it's pretty unique in that in a lot of professional settings, you won't necessarily have money set aside just for you for professional development. So, at Jenkins, it was really great to know that you had that pot of money to dip into if a conference came your way that you were interested in. While I was there, I became pesticide certified in Pennsylvania. So gaining that knowledge, certifications are really great to have on your resume, especially as you are early in your career. You're trying to build those credentials and those skills, and having the support, the time, and the money to gain those certifications is really great. And I also bought a lot of books because I was there, during COVID. So a lot of lectures were free or cheap and they were virtual. So I had this money at the end and I just kind of started to build my own reference library of, arboricultural books about community forestry, about plants. So you can really kind of take the stipend and run with it however you want, as long as it is contributing to your education and your professional development. And as I, started to think about what I wanted to do after the fellowship, I kind of saw a few openings for community forestry and was looking more in that realm. And I used the last of my fellowship funds to apply to take the certified arborist exam. So still helping me in my career today was that fellowship stipend. And, I still hold that credential. And one other thing that I don't think has been touched on is that as a fellow, there is provided and required housing on site. So it's not in a public area of the garden, but you don't have to worry about a commute in the morning, and it just really contributes to that immersive experience. And it is pet friendly. So here is my cat, Squid. She really enjoyed looking out the window at the gardens. And here she is helping me study for my certified arborist exam. She was really interested in arboriculture. So the fellowship is, really great about skill building and horticulture and gardening, and you're on site and you're in it, and you're also in the middle of America's garden capital. So Philadelphia has over 30 gardens within a 30-mile radius of the city. Some of the ones are pictured here. Steve mentioned trips, and we definitely visited at least a few of these throughout the year, throughout my time at Jenkins. But just being in America's garden capital with so many resources and such a large network around you is really great for creating your own network and your own personal connections with people, and kind of seeing where you want to go after the fellowship. Because a lot of these places, yes, they offer horticulture, they're public gardens, but they also offer a lot of other career paths that are horticulture adjacent, or maybe you like plants, but you don't want to be in the garden, so you go into communications, or in my case, you go into urban forestry. So just a quick definition, urban forestry is the planting, maintenance, care, and protection of trees in an urban setting. And so this isn't just about cities. I think a lot of people, they hear urban, they think high density cities, they think Philadelphia, New York. And that is true. The trees in those cities are part of the urban forest, but Devon and Wayne, they also have urban forests. Pretty much anywhere where there's a lot of people, there's sidewalks, there's development, and there's trees, you're managing an urban forest. And so this is really connected to public horticulture, in that public horticulture is about engaging people and connecting them with plants, but it's more about bringing people to your garden and inviting them in, whereas urban forestry is almost the inverse, in that you are going to the community and greening those spaces and bringing the greening to them, to their neighborhood, and connecting with them where they're at. And this is really important work because as we continue development, we're, cutting down trees, cutting into the urban forest, and over 140 million acres of America's forests are located in cities and towns. So continuing to replant, preserve trees is really important to keep the benefits of plants in our cities. So I'm at the Delaware Center for Horticulture. Horticulture is in the name, and it's definitely part of what we do. So I still am pretty connected with horticulture, working with our public landscapes team. And we've been cultivating greener communities since 1977. And we do this through our 3 programmatic areas of community forestry, urban agriculture, and public landscape management. So as a community forester, it's a good balance between that hands-on work like I had at Jenkins. I'm still out there planting, mulching, watering, but I'm also doing the project management side of it, where I'm planning the sites that we're going to plant. I'm choosing the species, I'm ordering them, I'm managing the budget. I'm the only forester, it's a 1-person department. And so a lot of the bigger tree plantings, especially if we plant within the city, they will be contracted out. So I'm managing contractors and those budgets, and communicating with them is a huge part of what I do. I also work alongside our GIS and data analysts to update tree inventories and make sure that we're doing our work in areas that have low canopy cover. And a lot of these areas also tend to be low to moderate income. So just finding those areas where there is plantable space and there's a need for trees, and so that our work is the most impactful. I mentioned I'm a 1-person department, so I'm really dependent on the community. I'm also doing work out in the community. So very few of our projects are actually on DCH's property. So the majority of what we do are in city parks, county parks, the city right of way. And so a big part of my job is working with civic associations and maintaining those relationships, working with DCH volunteers, working with schools and teachers and doing Arbor Day programs, and just really bringing the greening to the community and keeping those relationships is really important for my role. A common theme, as with Jenkins, education and outreach is really important. So whether that's internal or external, doing plant identification walks or presenting lectures, that's a big part of my role day to day. So we also have a workforce development program called Branches to Chances, where individuals who are unemployed or underemployed and maybe previously incarcerated are re-entering the workforce and looking to get that hands-on horticulture experience, which also intersects with urban forestry. And so I've done a lot of work with them, presenting lectures about the benefits of trees and climate change and why we're planting trees where we are. And then also doing a lot of tree ID walks, which is my personal favorite. And then managing and training interns and seasonal staff. Also, like Jenkins, professional development stays with you through your life. So continuing on my ISA certified arborist certification, keeping that up to date. And then I was also able to obtain a tree risk assessment qualification, also through the International Society of Arboriculture, who sets the international standards for planting, pruning, tree removals, mulching. They're a really great educational resource. And so keeping up with them and keeping up with the best practices. And then I've also been able to attend a few conferences, such as the Partners in Community Forestry Conference, which is the largest gathering of urban foresters. So last year it was in Louisville, Kentucky, which is a city and a state that I've never been to before. And actually this Saturday, I'm traveling to Seattle, Washington to go again to the Partners in Community Forestry Conference and check out the Pacific Northwest and see what they're doing in terms of urban forestry. Again, building connections, keeping that web of professional colleagues that you have, and also just advocating for yourself in why this professional development course or this conference is beneficial to you and to the organization. Because again, that fellowship stipend is really great, but unfortunately, a lot of places don't seem to have that. So just kind of being comfortable saying, where you want to go in your career and why you think this conference or this course or certification is going to benefit both you and the organization you're working for. And with that, I thank you all again for tuning in today. And I'm going to turn it back to Amy to do the question and answer portion.
Thank you, Heather. That was wonderful. fun to remember all about your project as well. Those signs have been serving us well. We actually
good to
did have
hear.
a question pop up. Speaking of those signs, someone actually asked where we got the signs and kind of what was that process. So maybe Heather and I don't know, Steve, if you want to chime in on the actual signs themselves.
I don't remember where they were ordered from. I don't think I handled that portion of it. But I know we at Jenkins, there was an engraver. So we ordered blank signs and did the engraving in-house, so that, you know, we made sure that all the spelling and all the names were accurate and consistent. Steve, I'm not sure if you know the distributor of the signs.
The company called Gravotech.
All right, great. Thank you so much. All right, so for those of you who are out there, if you have questions for the panel, feel free, again, the Q&A section on your Zoom toolbar, you can ask those questions. Otherwise, I have a few to ask the group while you guys are thinking and sharing questions. One was I really did want to get back to the educational stipends. I know, Nicki, you wanted to share a little bit more about what you have been doing. And Liesl, I'd like to let you have the opportunity as well to talk about maybe some of your plans or things you've done. So Nicki, I don't know if you want to kick us off since you kind of had a little momentum there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I've been able to use my stipend for a lot of different things. I've attended several conferences that have been really great. And then I think that the biggest one, the flashiest one, I was able to attend the Smoky Mountain Wildflower Pilgrimage this spring, which was amazing. It's basically like a week-long conference, but it's just a bunch of plant people gathering in the Smokies in the spring when all the ephemerals are in bloom and going on led hikes throughout the week. So I got to engage with a lot of botanists and other horticulturists and also just great hobbyists who come every year. So that was great. And again, all covered by my stipend. I'll also be pursuing a pesticide applicator license. That's the other one.
I was muted. I said smart.
Yeah, I can share what I was.
Liesl, do you want to share a little bit about your stipend plans?
Sure. The one thing that I have used my stipend for so far is to attend the Woody Plant Conference. That was a really cool conference to go to, and I learned a lot that day. In the future, I'm also planning to get my pesticide applicator license, and also I'm looking forward to getting my arborist certification. So those are the two things I have my eye on. And from there, we'll see. I might also get some books and that kind of stuff.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing those. All right, so we had a couple questions come through. The first is, how necessary is a master's during the internship fellowship? Have previous interns or fellows found having one useful?
I'll jump in on this one. It's actually kind of unusual that a fellow would have a master's degree when they come to the fellowship. And whenever somebody does apply with a master's degree, we kind of flag that person because we ask ourselves, is the fellowship really necessary? Do they actually need this experience because they've had a lot of extra experience that most others haven't? And so there's only ever been a few that have had a master's degree. Most of the time they're coming here with a bachelor's degree. And I mean, Liesl does have a master's degree. Maybe she should answer whether having that was useful or not.
Just to chime in, my master's degree program was very focused on like industrial pollution and chemicals. So it had nothing to do with horticulture. And coming to Jenkins, I was kind of trying to bridge a gap between I had interest in plants and had studied them, but had no actual experience working with them. So Jenkins is providing that, like that physical experience working with plants.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's always very important when we do go through the interview process, trying to make sure that it is something that's going to really benefit the candidate. I myself was a fellow when I first came here, and I had a master's degree when I came here as well. And even during the interview process, I was asked why I would be applying if I already had a master's degree. And I really had to sell it. I really had to make sure that I explained that, yeah, I might have a master's degree, but it's not in this. You know, I didn't have a horticulture background. I was just getting really interested in native plants at the time. And so, you know, I think it was almost a little bit of a hard sell. So having a master's degree could be a detriment, I think, for a position similar to this.
All right, thanks for sharing those. Nicki, I know you had a chance to share some really awesome numbers with your fellows project. Someone is asking Heather for some also awesome numbers. Heather, how many trees do you think you've planted in your role as community forester?
That's a good question. I have a spreadsheet. So I've been with the Delaware Center for Horticulture about a year and a half. I think my second week on staff was our first tree planting. So in terms of planting, and I'll count also trees that we've distributed at giveaways and sales, assuming that those end up in the ground. I think close to 400 trees have been planted or distributed in the Wilmington, Newcastle area.
Wow. That's awesome. Great work.
Thank you.
This question is for Liesl about your project. And maybe Steve also wants to chime in, but regarding the erosion in the floodplain, will there eventually be a plan to limit the erosion?
I mean, I can let Steve talk to this a little bit more. Jenkins has been focusing a lot on what to do. And some of it, I think in the past, it seems like there's been a lot of planting efforts, but even then the erosion is so aggressive that it's washing plants out. And so Jenkins has been in the process of looking into grants, and the township has also been working together with Jenkins to possibly put together a grant that in the future could prevent some of that stormwater and erosion issues.
Yeah, I would say that it's only been the last 5 years or so that erosion has been a significant issue here, but it has happened very quickly. And so, as Liesl said, we have tried to slow down the erosion with some plantings. We've actually removed big areas of the garden to replant those areas with things that would better hold the soils. We've done a lot of, whenever we do like brush maintenance, we remove invasive trees. We actually lay the branches perpendicular to slopes, so it helps slow down rainwater. Our biggest issue here is that there's a stream at the bottom of the hill, and all of the water from all the neighboring communities flows through this garden. And there's major stormwater issues. Everybody's aware of it. Everybody in our community is aware of it. And we need to take some bigger measures to slow down the stormwater and to capture the stormwater. And so, like Liesl said, we've been working with the township. We have a stormwater management plan that was written by Maliora in Phoenixville. And now it's just a matter of getting the funding so that we can follow through with a lot of those projects.
Great, thank you for sharing that with the group. So this is a question about the fellowship itself. Can it be centered around agriculture, and have there been any recent projects that ever focused on food?
The mission of Jenkins is to be a garden, a botanic garden, not an agricultural garden. So no.
We do have collections for that person who asked that question. We do have collections that, revolve more around like edible plants, like we have pawpaws, and I know Nicki has led a tour educational program about edible plants and things like that. So there might be opportunities to talk about plants that have those types of connections, but I would agree that agricultural crops are not one of our focuses, mission related. All right, let's see. Great. Well, all of you out there, keep thinking of questions. I did have a couple more that I was thinking for the group. talking about the fellows projects, I know that Nicki talked a little bit about how in her interview process, the project for the Upper Wildflower Garden was kind of already front of mind. Nicki was a good match for that. And that she just kind of went off to the races on that project. How were some of the other projects matched up with the fellows?
So we have an ongoing list of potential fellow projects. I will walk through with Karen, our head horticulturist, to identify areas of the garden that need improvement. And then we'll keep a running list of those larger areas, and we'll flag things that we think would be appropriate as a fellow project. And then when we do hire a new fellow, I might pick 2 or 3 of those and review those with that person and see which one that they're most interested in and let them choose. I will say that in Nicki's case, and I believe in Heather's case also, we already knew what it was that we really wanted to do. And Nicki was the perfect fit for hers. Heather was just, open to anything and everything. So it just worked out really well with her. And actually Liesl's project is not something that we had in mind before she came to us. It was something that was really a combination of, we have these other issues, and this is something that Liesl was interested in. So we ran with that.
Great. What do you think, and this can be answered by everyone because everyone but me are either current or former fellows. What are 1 or 2 of the most influential parts of the fellowship in your opinion? Who wants to go first? Heather, you want to kick us off since you're unmuted? There we go.
Sure. Yeah, so I think that even during the fellowship and now especially in my role afterwards, I reflect on how important the volunteer program was, and just building the confidence of managing volunteers and kind of gaining that assertion and being comfortable with that, especially because as a fellow, you're probably a bit younger and, age doesn't really have anything to do with it. But in my experiences, being a younger woman, I was, I think, a little bit more timid. But I feel like I really grew a lot in managing volunteers and being able to politely give constructive criticism for quality assurance and just, make sure that the volunteer program was running, smoothly, and that, great work was getting done in the gardens, which it of course was. But that's something that I definitely, take with a lot today in my role.
I'll jump in. I think that one of the best things about the fellowship could be a blessing or a curse, depending on the day, but it's the fact that it's a small organization with a small staff. And because there's a small staff, it means we're all kind of doing everything. We all wear a lot of hats. And in the day-to-day grind, that can get frustrating. But at the end of the day and at the end of the fellowship, you realize how much you've learned because of that. How many opportunities that you have had to work with so many different tools and equipment and work in so many different ways to run a public garden that maybe if it was a larger organization, the fellows wouldn't have the opportunity to do. And so they might otherwise leave without having those experiences. But I think having a small staff is actually a good thing for the fellows.
Yeah, to jump in on that, I think like my answer would be the people you meet. You experience all different kinds of people. You're learning from people that have tons of experience. You're working with volunteers that have been in the field for years, and you're working with peers and interacting with the public. It's like all these different interactions, and it really helps you learn and build.
Yeah, I would say it's really having the freedom to explore what you're interested in. Things are pretty low stakes in general, so and it's very easy and comfortable to reach out to different members of the staff. So if I, had an idea for a new program or had an idea that I wanted to explore, then I would feel totally comfortable reaching out to whoever on the staff that's most appropriate with, and knowing that there would be support and encouragement. So that's really valuable when you're trying to figure out, what you want to do or what you're interested in.
Thanks for sharing all of your experiences. There's a couple questions that have come in while we were talking that get into a little bit of more of the nitty gritty. So Steve, I might allow you to at least kick off with some of the answers here. Can you tell us a little bit more about the schedule that the fellows keep and how many hours they work each week?
There's a lot of flexibility. We work 7:30 to 3:30 and take a 30 to 40-minute lunch. Again, there's a lot of flexibility with that. It's usually around noon, but sometimes we finish a project or we're at a good breaking point at 11:30 and we might just decide to break then. We don't typically have scheduled breaks throughout the day. We just kind of do the job, take a break when you need it, come get a drink when you need it, come get a freezy pop. Those are always a big hit. So it's 7:30 to 3:30 every day. There are some weekend and evening duties like closing the front gate, that kind of thing. It's always nice to have the fellows on site on the weekends. If something happens, if a tree falls in the parking lot or something like that, it's good to have people around and sort of on call that can manage that. But generally it's a 35 to 40-hour week. Were the other parts of that question, does that answer it?
I think it did. Yes.
Right.
Yep. So another question that came in talks about, it's been awesome to have Heather with us today talking about, the kind of the next steps after the fellowship. So Steve, maybe you can chime in a little bit on this, but how many fellows or interns have continued work with Jenkins after their positions have ended? And how many move on to something else? And I might also add in a question that I was going to ask, which is, if they do move on to something else, like Heather, what are some other examples of positions that people hold or, industries that people have gone into?
So there's only ever been one person that stayed on as a staff member after the fellowship ended, and that was me. I did have to move off site though, and eventually came back. There have been a couple others that moved on to other positions at other places and came back to Jenkins after a while, but Jenkins doesn't have the staff openings to be able to keep people on after they're finished. But we kind of build people up. They're here for 2 years as a fellow and they get to know the place and know the people and know the processes. And so whenever there is a position that comes open, former fellows will often come back and apply to those because they're a perfect fit already. They've already been groomed for those positions. As far as what other people do after they leave, I would say that maybe a half go to further education. There have been a few that have gone on to get landscape architecture degrees, other horticulture degrees. Some decide to go into like natural resource management, more on the like ecological design part. Urban forestry, has been very popular. I would say those are the main things for sure. Of course, other gardens as well. But.
So there was one more question that came in, which is actually kind of a perfect wrap up for us, which is, Steve, maybe you can chat just a little bit about what the process is for folks who are interested in applying for the program. I will say out loud that we have updated the Jenkins website and the fellowship page. So it has been updated with the application for the coming term. And I can share that information when I email out the recording of the presentation. I can send links to getting to all of those places for application. But Steve, if you wouldn't mind just chatting maybe a little bit about the time frame, what the interview process kind of looks like, and when decisions are made for the fellowship.
Yeah, so as we get applicants, I will share all of that stuff with Karen, our head horticulturist, and we will read through it all and we'll have a spreadsheet. And there's actually a pretty complicated rubric that we have kind of worked out for what we think is most appropriate for the next fellow, the things that we would like to see for that next fellow. And we just keep plugging them in as they come in, and then we rank them based on, again, how we think they would fit with us and a bunch of other parameters. And, when it comes down to being pretty close to the deadline, we will start reaching out to schedule interviews. And it's usually like we'll have 2 interviews with our top candidates.
With the hopes that they would start in spring of 2023.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. Wonderful. All right. Let's see. I think maybe one snuck in there. It's asking if interviews and start dates vary based on the circumstances of the candidate pool. So could things vary a little bit depending on the candidates?
Start dates for sure. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much to everyone here on screen with me. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Nicki. Thank you, Liesl. Thank you, Heather, for being with us and sharing all of this awesome information. The fellowship program is really unique and special. And so I hope everyone who joined in today realizes that. And we just want to thank you for your support and for joining us today. And like I said, I will be sending out the recording with some resources and references for you guys about the program. So stay tuned for that. And again, thanks for tuning in, and hopefully we'll touch base with you in some way via Jenkins soon. Bye, everybody.